We are back for our third discussion video for our Bonded Book Club Book of the Month, Pushout by Monique Morris. Our last hour we heard from Sam, and I'm going to be picking up. Our first question for our third discussion set is, all of the girls Dr. Morris spoke with were strikingly self-aware regarding their school environments, home environments, and interactions with educators. Why do you think that is? So she made note of this in the book, especially when she was talking to some of the girls who were victims of sex trafficking and were aware of what they were engaging in, but were not necessarily aware that it was sex trafficking. So she was sort of, it was remarkable about how young they were and knowing what was happening to them. It is stunning, especially when you think about a young person who is able to process very adult things that are happening to them. At the same time, it's not that surprising, and it's sort of the idea that when someone is being oppressed, when something is happening to someone, who better to talk to than the person that it's happening to? And that's what I really liked about the book Pushout, was that it really centers the discussions on Black girls specifically and uses their words to describe the narratives and the experiences that they've been through. So it's not surprising to me that so many of these young girls were so self-aware. Some of the examples that she gave in the book were girls who noticed that dress codes were being applied differently to them as Black girls versus white girls, or being applied to heavier girls versus like thinner girls, and how unfair that was. And they recognized that and they understood that, and yet adult teachers and adult administrators could not recognize that they were applying dress codes indiscriminately. So it wasn't surprising to me that the girls were self-aware. They were incredibly self-aware because they live it day in and day out. So that really wasn't super surprising to me, and is maybe another lesson, especially for adults and educators, teachers, legislatures, that we do need to be involving students, and especially the students that we need to remedy systems that have harmed them permanently, potentially. We need to be involving them in how to move forward and correct things. Our second question is, what role does the threat of actual violence in schools play in the heightened surveillance? What can be done to strike a better balance of safety and a robust learning environment? So examples that she gives of heightened surveillance in schools are students having to go through metal detectors in order to come into school or have their bags searched. Officers who are present throughout the building or within classrooms or roaming halls, or just available at a teacher's beck and call. Another thing she described was in-school jail, which is basically any kind of confinement that a student could find themselves in, such as suspension or basically where they're pushed out of the classroom, placed in an area of confinement where they're no longer able to interact with teachers and other students. So that's the idea of heightened surveillance that she's talking about. So when she spoke with students about this, who were in schools where they were subjected to heightened surveillance, a lot of them were, here's a quote that one of the students said. "The young woman laughed, and there was something more to be said about the different, separate but unequal learning spaces that were provided for concentrations of poor Black and brown children as opposed to their more affluent counterparts. Her mention of feeling, quote, low-key, halfway protected, end quote, by security in school because of the threat of physical violence was part of her inability to envision an alternative. For her, surveillance was a typical strategy used to provide safety in school as opposed to building a collective culture that elevates safety through equity and respect." So Morris basically says that there's kind of this, because so many of these students have grown up with so much heightened surveillance in their schools, they don't know anything different. They think that this is just part of going to school. And she interviewed a couple of young girls in the book who had been at really, really poor and impoverished schools, and what that was like when they moved, maybe they moved cities or moved to a more affluent school, and not having their bags searched coming into school in the morning, not having, police with sniffing dogs going through the school all the time, and how that really created this different environment. Some of the young girls that she interviewed even talked about the schools feeling like jails almost, because discipline, having police officers in school, having these metal detectors, having this really heightened disciplinary environment made students feel very confined. It didn't feel like a place where they could mentally, emotionally, and physically, because they're children, grow, which is what a school is supposed to be. It was more of a focus on discipline and structure, and it was done supposedly in the name of safety, but putting children in that environment doesn't necessarily equate to safety. Feeling like you're in jail doesn't make people necessarily feel safer or want to conform to what educators and police officers or whoever want them to conform to. So anyways, she says what needs to happen in order for there to be a safer learning environment for children is to really elevate safety through creating a collective environment of equity and respect. So many of the children in the book talk about having to basically defend their own dignity on a regular basis, and how this is confused with defiance and talking back. But there's a misunderstanding of so many structures that they have to do this on a regular basis. And so she talks about later on, which we'll get to in our last videos, creating a culture at the school that elevates respect and safety. Our next question is, what is meant by permission to fail? Why is this detrimental for Black girls, and what impact does it have on their opportunities for success? So permission to fail is about accepting the idea that Black girls will not perform at the same level as their peers, or that they don't show up to learn, or that they are somehow giving an attitude that doesn't make them competitive scholars or learners in the classroom. So by way of example, a young girl shows up to school and she doesn't feel like doing the assignment that day. And when a teacher or educator gives into this idea of permission to fail, they just say, all right, whatever, you do it tomorrow, that's fine. What Dr. Morris is saying is we need to be engaging with children who show up and are not willing to participate that day for whatever reason. Everybody has their reasons. And connecting with them so that the child does do the work, even if they don't want to do the work in that very moment, they're children, and help them to engage so that they can be competitive in a way that will benefit her in the future. So I remember there's this one example that she gave where a young girl showed up and she didn't want to do her work that day, and she was just tired, and she had her head down on her desk. And in this specific learning environment where teachers have been educated with how to connect with students and how to engage with students, particularly students who had come from trauma or impoverished economic circumstances, the teacher went over and started talking to the student about what was going on and why she had her head down on her desk and didn't want to do the assignment. And it turned out the student was tired and she was hungry and honestly wanted a snack. So the teacher went and got her a snack. She had her snack, and then she completed the assignment instead of just being like, sure, you know what, give up for the day. Giving into that idea of permission to fail is not only is it insulting, but it's not helping anybody to get our children educated, specifically Black girls educated, to help them be competitive and to have better more promising futures. And that's part of what educators and teachers need to be able to do. One thing that she says during her discussion of permission to fail, Dr. Morris says, to revoke the permission to fail that has been granted to too many Black girls, schools must provide ongoing professional development that emphasizes reducing implicit bias and engages all manner of staff in the school's process of institutionalizing fair discipline policies. Teachers need the opportunity to unpack their own unconscious decision-making processes and co-construct tools to help them better respond to students in crisis. So basically, giving into this idea of permission to fail, allowing students, specifically young Black girls, to fail in schools is part of biases that teachers may have about these students, and that's problematic. And so not only do teachers need to work on unpacking that, but teachers need to learn a number of tools in order to be able to respond to students who are bringing all sorts of different things to the table when they come to school every day. Okay, so our final question for this discussion video. React to the statement on page 85. Quote, people who have been harmed are the ones who harm others. How do you think this notion of people who are harmed harm others factors into the experience of Black girls in school? It reminds me of the quote, like, hurt people hurt people. And I think what Dr. Morris is saying there is that when young Black girls in schools are acting out, it's not for no reason at all. Many of these students are bringing trauma, mental illness, poverty, abuse, physical or mental, with them every day when they come to school. And teachers, when she did interviews with teachers, a lot of them didn't know how to recognize this. They could only respond to the actions of the students with more discipline. So instead of seeing a student being defiant, not wanting to do their work, maybe being loud or whatever, disrupting class, instead of looking at that student and thinking, okay, I need to peel back the layers, figure out what's going on here, just administering hardline discipline, top-down discipline, conformist discipline isn't helping that student. And if that's the goal, if we really want to provide a quality education to all students, we need to have the tools in order to address all kinds of issues that students bring to school every day. Not every student is going to be clicking their heels, coming in, having a great day, had no problems at home, especially when you're talking about schools in really economically challenged areas. A lot of these students are, they've got a lot of other things on their mind than just school every day. And so in order to keep them in school, which should be the goal, we've got to have tools for teachers so that they can recognize these things and not just say, oh, you are being inappropriate at school, you are acting out. Being able to recognize these and address it so that you can be helpful to students. And this is not just about teachers, and I said this in my last video too. This is about having more people in schools who can help students, whether that be guidance counselors or more teachers or more administrators. This is not just a one teacher can fix all of this type of issue. This is a very large issue, but anyways, educators and administrators need more tools in their toolbox to be able to handle students in ways that are not just discipline oriented. So that's all I got for my video. Sam will be on at 3 o'clock and then I'll be back at 4 o'clock. See y'all then.